Welcome to the Gem Series. On today's episode, I am thrilled to introduce Benny Tran. Benny is an experienced executive in strategy and project development across multiple industries, including sports and entertainment, health, sustainability, and management consulting. He has worked with the Clintons, dealing with major global issues like climate change and HIV. He's launched a basketball team in Vietnam, and he was absolutely instrumental in building the stadium for the Los Angeles Football Club. So, what does all of this mean? It means that Benny is a master of execution. I had so many questions about how to take something from beginning to finish, so take a listen and you'll hear about what it takes to truly execute. All right, so today on the Gem Series, I am so happy to have Benny Tran. Hey Benny, how are you doing?
Hello everyone.
Great. For anybody that doesn't know Benny, you've worked with the Clintons, helping with dealing with major global issues like climate change and HIV. You've helped launch a basketball team in Vietnam, and you've built a massive stadium, and you are growing LAFC like wildfire. For those that don't know, before sports, what was your background, Benny?
Yeah, my background was in actually international development. Went to public policy school for it and also worked for the Clinton Foundation on public health and climate change. And then before that, I started off my career as a management consultant.
Oh, got it. And what was, it's just wild to think about that big shift, I guess, from going from working with the Clintons to getting into the sports world and really helping build out the LAFC team. I think a key thing that I was looking at was some of your, leadership skills that you've built up over time. Can you tell me a little bit? I was wanting to know, I guess, background. What was growing up like for you, and what do you think maybe led you down this path?
Yeah, it's I've been very fortunate to go down the path that I've been on. It's an untraditional path, but yeah, I grew up in Atlanta. That's how I know Vu as a childhood friends with my brother and childhood friends with us. In a very modest family, we were on government programs. And, one of the biggest drivers for me was to make sure that, that growing up, we were successful so that, that we as the future of our family didn't have to live in such a situation, but also for the future of the next generation of the Tran family to make sure that we were, ensure that we were successful. And very luckily, my parents worked all the time. Many of us were self-sufficient. And then, I have a brother who's a tenured professor at Vanderbilt. My sister was one of the top performers as an insurance underwriter. And I've had the pleasure of taking a fun journey, in my life that took me around the world and across different sectors. And so, what's interesting in high school is what really opened my mind was really when my brother told me that I should learn Arabic because that was offered at our high school, either Arabic or Chinese. And that was a ticket for making yourself unique in college applications. And luckily, we had a high school where they offered the International Studies program, International Baccalaureate program, but also Chinese and Arabic as options. And at the time, I didn't want to do anything Asian because I came from an Asian background and I wanted to try Arabic. And lo and behold, I fell in love with it. It was, that kind of really put me on the path of one, having the ability to actually leave Atlanta, but then also kind of my exposure to the world. That kind of experience kind of opened my eyes to my own political identity or my own ethnic background. And so I went to high school, went to study, summer school in Massachusetts, and then I was sent to Egypt to study for a summer, and I absolutely got hooked to traveling and learning new cultures. And then in college, I went full throttle with studying the Middle East and Arabic, and then that's what I did primarily, and lived in Egypt for a summer. I went to the Middlebury language program where you have to commit not to violate speaking a language other than that language, including English, unless you're ordering, of course, Chinese food at the restaurant down the street. So all very informative, very cool. Got exposed to new cultures, new people. And that's kind of where I discovered where I really had the desire to help people in dire situations, which in Egypt, poverty level is very high. It's a developing country. I volunteered for nonprofits, and so that's where I kind of planted the seed in me to really pursue something international, which could have included being joining the State Department or diplomatic corps, and that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a journey. And also, I just want to say that immersive language experience. Oh my gosh, it can be pretty intense, right?
I enjoyed it. I loved it. I think it also depends on what level you are. If they actually had people beginning to study Arabic, and that's hard. But I was
Mm,
already level 300 at university level, so I already had pretty well. The mechanics of using the language just was came easy for me. So the immersion wasn't too bad, and I really enjoyed it. So
that's no, that's incredible. And as you're going through this, you go to Emory, right? And then from there, you go on to Princeton. So what's your mindset? I mean, have you started kind of honing in on something that you're really trying to go after at this point? Because it sounds like the world's pretty wide open, right? At
yeah.
this stage of life.
Well, yeah, the pathway was. I mean, it even further opened up when I decided to apply for Fulbright to scholarship, and then that was gave me the opportunity to go to Vietnam. And so it was the opportunity to explore a new part of the world. It was my heritage country, which was very cool. And so it kind of led down the path of wanting to do the same thing, except that it was supposed to another part of the world. And after that, returned to the United States to find a job before I could apply for grad school. Because in grad school, and the way that it works, so in terms of mindset and goals, there's goals at every step of the way, right? First of all, high school, how do I get into college? And what do I need to do to ensure that the probability of getting into college, a good college? Look, I got denied by a bunch of schools: Harvard, Duke, Stanford. Luckily, I stuck with Emory, who unfortunately gave me a full scholarship to go there, and that was the best thing that happened. And then when I came back from doing my Fulbright, I didn't have a job, so I landed at a management consulting firm, which actually gave me a baseline of how to really approach a lot of the work that I did in my career or solving problems. And so, yeah, so that was with the goal of getting into one of these international studies, international development programs. So actually, I had goals, but I was trying to achieve what was my next step to get there. Especially in the early times in your career, you have to decide and understand how you become successful in that sector. And the international development sector, you essentially have to get experience before you grad school, and then go to grad school in order to get a good job. And
Absolutely.
there's certain
Yeah.
sectors like this one where if you don't have experience, you can't get a master's degree, but no one's going to give you a job if you're too inexperienced. So
Hmm.
sometimes you got to figure out the best pathway because look, not a lot of people can afford to pick up, go to an African, sub-Saharan African village, try to help a village do X, Y, Z, unless it's Peace Corps, then have
Sure.
enough to go to a top 5 grad school that does this stuff. Then that continues your level of education. I think public health, a couple of sectors that are similar to that, as opposed to getting an MBA that can give you a general education to support you to do whatever you want. I think in today's world, if you're going for an MBA, it's helpful in either for-profit or nonprofit sector, and also you can see the evolution of how the private sector does help with nonprofit issues or social issues or economic development issues in developing countries. So yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this before, where what was your goal and mindset? Is actually I had goals.
Hmm.
That was the first step of your career, right? Do you need to decide whether you not need to get a graduate degree, how and why, and then you have to get there before you even think about bigger dreams. For example, grad school. For me, in order to work if I had dreams to work in the United Nations, the World Bank, you have to go to the top schools to get there. So how do I get to top schools so that I could continue
Yeah.
that? Not necessarily always true. I think that's unfair to say other programs. It's just one of those things that we have to assess the probability of, how you want to chart your success within that particular linear progression.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it's really fascinating to think about the way that career paths operate. And, I guess a parallel that I'm picking up on is, I mean, you're excellent at execution, in the sense of, it sounds like you envision the end goal and you're always able to kind of figure out, because even now you're talking about, like, sure, there's a goal, but there's steps to be able to get there. And no, I just find that I find that really interesting. And for me, something I'd love to know about is, what were some of the challenges along the way? Because I'm sure you uncovered some unknowns as you're going through all of this.
Sure. Well, I mean, one big challenge is the unknown. When you're going down a path, you don't know what will happen. So sometimes you try to maximize your upside, but at the same time, you're managing your downside risks, right? So how do you manage optionality, downside risks? What happens if you don't get into Harvard? What do you do? If you don't get that job, you don't get what you want. And you got to figure out what the plan is, and also not stress out about it, and just make sure that there's optionality and there's opportunities everywhere. And sometimes it takes pivoting. Sometimes it's just basically you take a chance on things, right? And sometimes, when luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So you always have to be prepared. And I feel like a lot of moments in my life have been very lucky. And so I'm very fortunate with the people in my life and the opportunities that have come through. And it's been zigzagging like crazy. But at the end of the day, we talked a little bit about going to grad school, but at the same time, how do you establish the base skill set to execute? And that's kind of what to train you a little bit in management consulting, is you can hop on different projects to figure out problems. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes operational, and sometimes that's how some of those firms work, is they tap into experts in the firm. My firm, we didn't have that luxury. And actually, when I moved to the Clinton Foundation, the leadership was actually from management consulting. So the same level of rigor of analysis and execution, but actually, in fact, we were implementing. We were not a donor. The Clinton Foundation wasn't a donor. It was also an implementing organization. So we actually had boots on the ground doing the work. And that actually is something that I found fascinating, and that I found fascinating until today. The approach of the Clinton Foundation was to, you can solve most anything. So you had the people with a background, similar consultants, and then you had, of course, the medical professionals and public health professionals that provided the high level of expertise. I remember, I showed up to Tanzania, and my boss, my direct boss, who was a deputy country director at the point, worked at McKinsey. He's like, Benny, we have $1 million fund from the Swedish government. Go figure out how to treat HIV/AIDS patients in rural areas. I was like, okay. Hopped on a car and went to rural Tanzania and tried to figure out analyze the situation, try to understand what was going on, and see if we can actually develop a program that actually helps provide medicine and keep people alive who are living with HIV in rural areas. And that was kind of a pilot model program that was supposedly replicable across the country or other parts of the world as well.
Wow, that's I can't even imagine taking on something so global. But what's interesting is, it sounds like you're still able to bring it to the community. Tell me a little bit about that transition from joining, whenever you started joining with the Clintons over there. I'd love to hear, like, how did that pan out, and what happened? I'd love to hear.
Well, this is one of those things where I'm telling you, I got lucky, right? So, we're very fortunate at Princeton. We're a small program, and everyone gets funded by that program. And that's why we have the amazing people that we do that come through that program, and also a balance of equity and giving people opportunities. So they had a summer program that they also funded. And then I applied to the World Bank, United Nations in Vietnam, because I had a previous background in being in Vietnam. I got denied. So it was April, and my wonderful counselor at the time, her name's graduate career advisor, Ann Corwin, was like, Benny, you need to get a job. And so for the summer, and the Clinton Foundation, I had no background in public health, no desire to go to Africa, and they rolled around for an interview. They're like, we like you. You want to go? I'm like, okay. And then interviewed the folks in Tanzania, and then hopped on a plane a month later. And then landed, and then it was go time by the time I got there. So that's kind of by chance, but it kind of launched my career with the foundation, the Clinton Foundation, and then after I came back to grad school, they were opening the office in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and then they asked me if I wanted to join them there to open that office. So that's how that all began, and then that's led to working in Vietnam for 7 years for the foundation. And then at some point in time, they said, well, why don't you tackle on the climate change program, and then implement that as well in country and also around the region. And it was interesting, like you said, in terms of, working in the community on the ground, but also our approach was we always wanted to work in national governments. And so we were working at the policy level, the planning level, national level, and we were working on the ground where we're implementing programs. Like, for example, how do you figure out how to send blood samples to a lab when there's only one lab in the middle of not within 300 miles of the surrounding provinces? How do you actually get a patient to give blood, to get it tested, to understand if they are living with HIV, then figure out how to treat them afterwards, right? So you're talking about the complete verticality of all those policy to programs to on the ground implementation. And yeah, we had a small team. We were nimble, and we had to do it all. So that was pretty cool.
So incredibly cool. So what was it like, going from the US to Tanzania? What was were you living out there for a while?
Yeah, I spent 4 months out there. I spent 4 months out there working for the Clinton Foundation. And look, I think my international career started with living in Egypt twice. So I wasn't too foreign. Now, sub-Saharan Africa sometimes can be fine, but it's also not the easiest place to live. But for me, international travel was not uncommon, and I took on every stride and learned the culture, learned the people, learned how to work work with people there, and then every single new country I live in or visit, it's an education, it's a lesson. And a lesson it's a way to grow and open your mind up a little bit. And all of it's educational, in terms of understanding perspectives. And then, for example, how do I perceive the market of LA when we're building the community and the fan base here?
Absolutely. And, that's something that I think is incredibly empowering, and what gets me really excited is the idea of being able to somehow make an impact in other people's life. What would you say is kind of was your driving force? I mean, when you were dealing with such global issues, what pushed you typically?
I think it was the passion to help improve people's lives. We had a mission, and the interesting thing about working in HIV/AIDS, specifically care and treatment, is that at the time, if you don't get medicine to people, they're going to die. And it was a mission. Our boss at the time, like, if you're not in it to do this, then you don't need to be here. But we all had a hard mission to get as many people on treatment as possible. So the drugs were there. There's another arm of the foundation that worked on supply chain and demand, so that it would lower the cost of the drugs. Right, it went from 10,000 to less than 600 to less than 100 within a time span of less than a decade. And that was a good part of the other. It was a good part of the other side of the foundation that allowed us to actually say, okay, now we can figure out how we have the medicine. Now we got to figure out how to actually get the medicine to people. And of course, it's not as simple as giving people medicine, right? Diagnosis, treatment, lab work, monitoring, and then people had to fight stigma, and that's why a lot of it was anchored in a lot of international development, right? It's all about, and whether it's education, whether it is health, whether it is legal or law, it's all about changing human behavior. And that's what public policy really is. How do you actually create a large policy to effectuate change in mass?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's interesting in the context of how America is approaching or have experienced COVID, the role of government, the role of public policy. I think, as you can already observe, it's kind of slid down the path of what people forgot, what the government does for them, but also it's contextually different in other countries as well. So yeah, I think that's something that I learned and picked up, and from, I guess, what we can call, my friend last night, we had dinner about this, right? It's intellect. There could be a better name, but intellectual elasticity of figuring out problems at many different levels, and not many people
Mm.
go operational back up to strategic or policy level, but being able to cover between both of them and everything in between. I've been fortunate enough to kind of engage that way, and it's been interesting.
Well, how do you keep such a cool head when you're dealing with something of that scale? I mean, climate change, HIV. What? Yeah. How do you eat the elephant one bite at a time, so to
Well,
speak?
well, I mean, look, they're enormous issues. There's enormous issues you can't solve for everyone. So you got to think about what you can possibly do. For
Yeah.
example, in Vietnam, if the percentage of people living with HIV is 0.4%, the numbers are not as big as Tanzania that are, I forgot what it was now, or even then it was maybe 5% or 10%. So you're talking about different scales, and you just have to approach it that way. And it's also kind of how you solve problems. So I think that makes a difference, right? If there's such a big number, then you have to make sure that infrastructure is there. If it's a small number, then you adjust to see what kind of how do you apply and solve that problem. So at the end of the day, there's percentage numbers, but there's also absolute numbers. And when you're dealing with lives, these are real numbers. I mean, we're going through this with COVID. Why does it matter? Even though it's a small percentage, why do hospital beds matter? Because at the end of the day,
Mm.
when you're in hospital beds, you're going to have people out there dying, and you
Yeah.
can't treat them. So you're putting doctors in a position to make decisions on who to choose to let live, essentially, right? They don't want to be in that position.
Wow. Yeah, that is just so true, and I feel like that framework can really be applied to everything that you just listed out. This framework for being able to identify the numbers and be able to, make a truly informed decision. I guess for me, I'm like, from our conversations, you have such a cool head, and I don't know. It seems like I can't imagine you ever being in a scenario where you're like ripping your hair out, and I feel like you kind of can't. I don't know, but
That's not true. I rip my hair out quite often. Uh, but yeah, I think you just measure out what you can effectuate, and you try to effectuate it, even though people think it's impossible. And keep that in mind. And shifting away from them, that's
yeah.
these issues are always not the funnest issues to talk about. Or let's shift it a little bit, where we worked on climate change, and we're trying to have people reduce their carbon emissions, right? And you can choose anything, right? Electric
Hmm.
cars. What we were specifically worked on was how do we reduce energy consumption in buildings in Southeast Asia? And we had a
Mm.
model to try to figure out how to trigger buildings to reduce their energy consumption because it's a massive emitter of CO2. What is the right business model to approach and help them adopt efficiency measures, right? So, I mean, yeah, we landed in Jakarta. We're like, well, does anyone have any of these things? And then you start figuring out how to cobble together. We knew what the business model could be. It existed elsewhere in the world, just didn't exist in these countries. And then you start piecing the parties together to execute a business model that would lend itself to long-term adoption. And it's not easy. I mean, it can take years to do so,
No.
and a lot of different levers, right? But understanding the wide knowledge of, hey, there's this economic incentive, there's this law, there's this willingness of a building to do X, Y, Z. There's service providers who can come in and help these buildings do X. Then you start kind of putting things together. But if you already say that you can't do something, you're not going to do it, right? You're always
Yeah.
to you have the hope to achieve, and that was part of my education at the Clinton Foundation. We're gonna, Clinton had a mandate. We're gonna go out there and do things that are different and approach this differently, and we're gonna effectuate change. And for a small nimble organization, I think that we were able to do a lot of that. And look, we failed in many other regards too. And I think that's what's really important. The other side of it is you should expect failures. Um, the tech sector says if you don't fail, that you haven't succeeded. But
That's it's kind of true in a sense, yeah.
so I always say it's not about how you fall, but it's how you get up, and you got to keep going. And I think that's it lends itself to a lot of different things like A/B testing. What is A/B testing? You got to keep testing until you find the right answer, or you keep testing because we have a stadium and we have the Los Angeles Football Club. We have players, but we have fans who like things, experience certain things. And you never know what they'll like one day or the next, and you got to go figure it out,
Mm.
reiterate until hey, they actually like the carne asada nachos.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really, really essential, being able to hone in on, yeah, exactly. Just reiterate over and over again as much as humanly possible. I keep thinking, because you've been to so many different countries, by the way. I think you've named like 5 since we've been chatting. But going to Vietnam, you went out there for 7 years. Can you tell me what was life like over there?
It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vietnam I would say is one of the easier places to live in the world. It has good food, infrastructure, things to do, fun things to do. I had a great time. Now, um, Southeast Asia is really interesting. I mean, all the economies are growing at the time, and one of some of the fastest growing economies within Asia, which is also the fastest growing region of the world. Things were changing. I mean, I remember I would travel. Next thing you know, I came back to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, and there's 3 new buildings, and so it was fascinating to witness the hustle and bustle that was occurring there. Um,
Mm.
it's uniquely different than my experience in, say, sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. Um, you know, that was a really fascinating time to be in Southeast Asia and learn about. I mean, Southeast Asia is also unique in the sense that every single country is completely different. Language, people, culture. So I would travel almost every week to Jakarta, to Bangkok, to Manila, to Hanoi,
Mm.
to Singapore. And, going back to solving, trying to solve problems, we had uniquely different sets of problems in every single different country. I really enjoyed that.
You are a man of mystery. You've done a little bit of everything, Benny. I love it. It gives me so many different questions that I'm curious about. Also, at this time you're working with the Clinton Foundation. This is just something I got to know. Did you get to meet the Clintons then, or did
Yes.
you?
Well, so Hillary was Secretary of State, so I've never actually met her directly. I actually was able to meet President Clinton 6 times in total in person. I'm very fortunate to be part of his logistics and hosting team in 3 times, which is cool. Uh,
Wow.
that's where I learned my event chops because when President Clinton comes to your country, it's like a rock star coming through or a head of state coming through with like whole fanfare. You got the motorcades, you got the crowds, you got your run of show and TikToks, like everybody defined by every minute and moving in and out. And was very fortunate to spend some time with President Clinton, even for a day or two each time he visited. But was very fortunate. He's a very unique man, very charismatic. Amazing human being. And to see also witnessing like the country of Vietnam, he was the one who normalized relations.
Yeah.
Sub-Saharan Africa, he is a hero. I mean, I remember the first time I was carrying his luggage. That was my proud moment. I was carrying his luggage. I put it,
Okay.
yeah, I put it on the car. We were the car following his car. We showed up to the hotel. All the hotel workers were in the lobby. They were crying and cheering for President Clinton. So it's pretty
Oh my
amazing.
gosh, that's got to be powerful to witness.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
So it was very, very cool. So that was a cool part of my job at the time. But it's pretty tough. You got to plan for a whole week, and it's a head of state coming to visit. But it's pretty amazing, and also how it affects the way that we approach our work and our influence in our work. So we don't have to be a big. Now everybody knows CDC. CDC is very active across the world. We're not a big CDC, fully funded with a lot of staff. We had 20 people in Vietnam trying to do all the work that we did. So it was very similar across the world of how nimble we want to be and and,
Yeah.
and how we can really have a large impact with little, I mean, we were working all the time, but it was kind of passion and mission that drove us to do what we needed to do and what we ultimately tried to be successful at. And that was really achieving those kind of outcomes we talked about for public health.
That would be a really electrifying experience, I think, in the sense of being able to feed off of each other's energy and all be driven to one mission. And I have no doubt that you were the one to the right person for the job over there. Any piece of advice that did you ever get a piece of advice from Bill Clinton by chance?
Not directly, I don't think, but he's always out there. One of the biggest things I did is this didn't come from Bill Clinton, but you have to be patient. And when you're working with, I'll give you an example. When you work with national governments, every single one is different. Every single one has their own structures, and every single one has their own opinion. So it wasn't without frustration that you tried to implement anything. I'll give you an example. When you have applying for a small business loan, you have to go through a lot of forms, right? I think they've actually fixed that by now, but you have to have a lot of patience. It took us a long time to implement some of the work that we did. We knew what the answers were, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, had guidelines of what countries should adopt, but every country feels like they needed to adjust it for their own, customize it for themselves, right? So we knew what the answer was, and we could have done it the next day, but that doesn't work that way. You have to vet it. The local experts have to see it. You have to make sure that the people on the ground are right. Then it goes through its system. It could take a year, but when it hits, it's very rewarding. And every country is different. Vietnam takes a long time to do something, but when they decide to do something on a nationwide basis, it literally happens the next day. Other places, great, we'll issue a plan, and then it takes a little while to work itself out. And that's something in America is a little bit different. I think that the policies take time, but things do or operationalize pretty quickly. But you have to have that kind of patience in these different countries that operate differently than we do. So our educational process, and I'll tell you what, when I came back to America, I had to get used to American work professional culture, and that's different in itself. So always learning, always adjusting. Pulling my hair out. It's not. You have to figure out how to be cool and collected. But yeah, of course I'm stressed and pull my hair out and why this, why that. But if you try to stress more than that really affects it. You're not changing anything by stressing more. That's something I learned. Past couple of years. You stress more. You're just making up stories to stress yourself out. You just gotta focus on how to solve the situation.
Absolutely. That's a really great perspective to have. I mean, it takes time to stress, it takes time away from getting the task at hand done. And ultimately, if it's going to be something that eats away at your productivity hours, I think it's helpful to remember just that, all you can do is try your absolute best and keep pushing forward.
It's an important mindset. I'll give you an example. I was stressed out of what my boss thought about me, and I thought I was going to lose my job. But there was no point in time ever that he thought that he even had in his head that I would lose my job. And what happens is the negative outcome of that is you thinking about maybe him thinking that you may lose your job. It negatively impacts your productivity and your effectiveness, and then it's a nasty cycle that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's so true. I mean, I've been in those scenarios too, where I've been thinking about something that's stressing me out, or worrying about a client, or, being afraid that somebody's upset. I think, there's all kinds of scenarios that pop up. So, and it might just be outside of reality. No, I think that's something that everybody should always try to remind themselves, at least if they want to hopefully live a little more calmly. So how on earth did you get to start a basketball team in Vietnam? That's pretty cool.
It was interesting. One of my good friends in Vietnam, his name's Henry Nguyen. One day he was like, guys, brought his friends together. He's like, hey, I want to start a basketball team, and to bring it, we'll be part of the Southeast Asian League, and say, can you help me out? And then next thing you know, you're like, hey, we got the basketball team. And then we cobbled together, separately there was a coach and a team. And then help with the branding, help with the execution of the games. It was very cool because, Vietnamese didn't know much about basketball. We actually had to stop after witnessing the first game that we had. Fans were cheering for both teams and just clapping every single time somebody scored something.
Well,
So,
it would be it's exciting all around, you
yeah,
know.
I mean,
That's
they're used to
yeah.
soccer, but they weren't used to basketball. And like, hey, why not? Let's clap and celebrate everybody's ability to score. And then
I kind of love that.
we had to whip out the microphone before the next game and had a training of 2,000 people in the arena and say, hey, this is how things work. And then we grew over time and they learned how to cheer and become fans of a professional basketball team in Vietnam.
Wow. Wow. And what was what was your role in that? It sounds like, I'm always hearing elements of community and being able to figure out like what people want and bring people together. What was your role in all of that?
Yeah, no, we're all hands on deck. Help with some of the marketing. Help with
Mhm.
bringing the crowd together and trying to work on the game day experience. Um, and that was kind of like a side job. I was actually the color commentator for ESPN Southeast Asia for our games. It's pretty fun. And yeah, working with the crowd and really whipping them up and trying to build a fandom for basketball in Vietnam. But that community stuff, I mean, in terms of the approach, really didn't hit until I got to LAFC. And if you do witness the way that we approach our brand, and how we approach, LAFC, our community, as in fans and our supporters and everything, we knew that was critical for our success to build a fan base and a culture around our brand. Really, we're building culture and brand, and we wanted to build something that represented the city of LA to do so. And so when
Mhm.
approaching how we approached to build the brand and the fan base was to be inclusive and to enroll them and not coming from a sports background and kind of learning about design thinking and these other methodologies. We use design thinking to enroll people into designing their own building, which is the stadium, a physical building or physical
Wow.
space, and also their
So wait,
experience.
the stadium is fully informed by the community?
Well,
Or the design is informed by the community?
there were elements of it that was formed by the community. Yes, I mean
That's so cool.
we did this in coordination with our architect. Look, we had to lay down the foundation of everything, right? We should
Sure,
this
sure.
many this many seats and this many premium areas. That was informed by our economic feasibility study. But at the end of the day, like, how do you want to experience it? What is your mobile experience like? How do you want to engage? What kind of food do you want? Supporters in soccer culture are very specific, right? They own a section. They're the hardest hardcore, fans of the club, and they're really important to us, right? And so we have a dedicated space for them. We're called the 3252 standing only. We invested to make it standing only per their request, and they have their own area concourse where they co-design. We worked with them to co-design the space itself.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so if you come
That's
and see it, I mean, this is driven completely by the fans in partnership with our creative director. We had sponsors in there, but yeah, you'll see it. This is their fingerprints all over, and there were a lot of cool, informative things that we gained from our fans too. Like for example, the supporter section was supposed to be standing only, and we were informed by mothers like, "Listen, my husband is crazy and fun, and he wants to stand in the standing section. I got two kids, so we need seats. So we incorporate
mm,
seats in the wings. They're still part of the supporter section, but they have seats versus standing only. So that was very informative for us, enrolling people, and we try to do that on a regular basis with our fans, get feedback on food, get feedback on experience. And the way you do it is design thinking. It's not a focus group. It's not, a one-to-one extraction.
mhm.
Let them share
Sure.
ideas with each other and ideate. We had a fun session one time with fans after our first year where I was like, draw your own fan journey and tell me which step of the way and how we can improve the process. And that's kind of like some of the few things that we do here at our club. And it's community driven. If you ever come out here, there's something called, instead of tailgating, it's called a family picnic where the supporters set up their tents. They bring their beer, they bring their food. they feed our security guards before we go to the game, or it's all one big happy family, and we're all in commonality cheering for our team, and that's how we approached our club, and how it represents the city of Los Angeles, and how the sport may be used as a platform to do that. So it's been great. We're in our fifth
Yeah.
season, and it's been really, really fun. Of course, there's soccer, but also, our players are involved in the community and driving that aspect of our club in general.
Oh, really? That's incredible. I just got to say, it sounds like you really built some serious trust with your fans by going through this process. You got to actually know your fans and your supporters, I should say, and they got to know you. I know it can be kind of daunting when you see that people are just building another giant infrastructure in your city, right? And yeah, I feel like it's essential to be able to establish some sort of rapport, or really get people on your side, and especially so for sports. And it just seems like you have a gift for being able to start a movement. What have you learned about starting movements?
Yeah, dude, I learned a lot from my coworker. His name is Rich Orozco, head of branding and community. Um, he's all about the movement. I learned about social movements in developing countries. He's like people movement, and that's kind of what we were trying to build, is a people movement in the city of Los Angeles. There was an existing team, the Galaxy, but we knew that it wasn't gonna be easy, and we had to kind of map out our thesis of what we could do to be successful. And we were lucky enough to learn along the way, and also kind of be successful at it. I mean, we've got a long way to go, but I think we've done a pretty decent job. At the same time we were coming to LA, we had to build a stadium, a team, a brand all at the same time, and open the stadium within 3 years and 4 months, right? Meanwhile, there are 2 NFL teams moving to Los Angeles. So people are like, you guys are crazy. We'll never get it done. You'll never get a stadium built. But we were able to execute.
Wow, that's got to be. I mean, I feel like this is so silly, but I feel like, yeah, if you don't have haters, you're not doing it right. No, I'm just kidding. But you got to have a few. You're gonna get a couple of people whenever you start doing something big like that. So no, it's just funny how that works out. So going from, just to kind of put the pieces together, going from Vietnam back to the US, tell me about, because I mean, it seemed like you were just absolutely killing it in Vietnam. You're going like all over Southeast Asia. You're super plugged in. I guess the reason I'm calling it out is because there's a lot of people that I would imagine they'd be like, yeah, I guess I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. This is like a pretty sweet setup. A US salary in Vietnam too. You're probably like, that's a good setup as well, I would imagine. So what pushed you to take it to that next stage of life?
Yeah, at the time, I was 35. At that point of my career, I wasn't ready to make a decision whether or not I would stay in Vietnam the rest of my life, career or not. And, at some level, I learned that there might be a perception that if you're in Vietnam for too long, you're market specific, skill specific, and it's hard to laterally move back to the US, especially when I worked in the sector, the nonprofit or development sector. Now, I knew that I didn't want to necessarily continue the international development sector, or at least come back to it, but I wanted to do something different. So one, I was making a pivot to business, and then I needed to make a pivot in market. So so in business, right, you go to business school because you're either changing careers, or you go for networking, or you want to build additional skills. But big thing is you can pivot. So in my case, I didn't want to go back to business school, and then I want to go back to private. And interestingly enough, when I was moved back to the U.S., that was more resounding than even my private experience with a management consulting firm. So that's one thing that I wanted to prove myself in the private sector in the U.S. Because after being it done in the U.S., then you can go back into the world and go anywhere else, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of like strategic on my part to switch markets and to switch sectors, and then maintaining flexibility is what I wanted to achieve. So then I can gain the experience and then decide later, do I want to go back or do I want to stay or do I want to go to another part of the world? And how do I shift across sectors, right? Which is, maybe a little bit harder depending, but if you have, the way that we're trained as management consultants is, you're a generalist as opposed to sector specific. But again, that's the other thing I love about working in sports and working for a sports team and a stadium is that you're constantly trying. It's very nuanced. It's not a hard business per se. I guess maybe that's a wrong word to use. It's a very nuanced business. You're dealing with human behavior all the time. Are they going to buy our tickets? Are they going to buy our food? How are they going to react to the team losing? Are they going to come when it rains? Are they going to come when it's hot? And it's always changing, and you got to constantly adjust, and that's what I find fascinating, right? Even parking may be the most mundane thing ever, but I got to make sure that's a good experience. And so, why are people driving up this road versus the other road? And so that constant figuring out and solving problems and all human behavior based really goes back to what I was doing previously anyway, right? Which is, public policy and trying to change human behavior for the better, or changing policy and infrastructure or programs to change human behavior for a better outcome for society in general and their own lives, right? So, it's kind of all have a similar line, but I find it very interesting. I'm not trying to, when you're trying to sell widget A or widget B, you're still trying to figure out, the market as well, right? So kind of all similar common principles apply. It's just that sports, you're selling an emotional product at some point or a media product that's on the field, and that's what you get to deal with. So
that's and yeah, I liked what you said about everything kind of adding up to this moment now, because that's something as we've been talking, I was like, well, you've been growing your worldview. There's been this focus on community. There's been this focus on people. There's been this focus on leadership. There's been these big projects that, it's like, all right, you have to execute. And it seems like all of this would, add up to making a lot of sense for creating what you're creating over at LAFC. Once you actually got to, I guess something I would love to learn about is the portion of time where you were, in America, figuring out what you wanted to do next. What's the story behind finding the stadium over there and finding that next mission?
In terms of
how did it happen? Were you hunting for it and you just saw an opening, or did somebody approach you about it? Or
in terms of the job, or in terms of the actual stadium's location?
I was referring to the job. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. So the same. So again, being lucky, the same person who brought me into the Saigon Heat was the founding owner of LAFC. So he was like, "Listen, I know you're in San Francisco looking for a tech job, and I know you're still looking, but I might get this team with a really great set of owners and trying to build a soccer team in a stadium in Los Angeles. At which point I've never been to Southern California. And so at some point I'm like, well, why not? And so I went, and then the first thing I did was when I landed, I went for an interview. That was first time in LA. A month later, I flew down and I literally landed, went straight to a meeting and started, helping with negotiating the lease for the stadium. It was a process that took about a year. So this is where, again, my work with national governments and trying to execute. And look, I've never built anything in my life, so I got to go figure it out. And not many people build stadiums or entitlements for land. So with a great team and great founders and, all the staff that we had a small team of 6 to 10 at the time, really put all our minds and our hearts and our blood, sweat, and tears to look for the site, start designing it and putting together a cadre of project managers, the architects, the construction companies to really start planning and designing a stadium. It was pretty fascinating, to actually go through that process. And it was a learning process for me to understand, hey, they'll say, what do you want in a stadium? I'm like, well, okay. And then all our leadership team started putting together everything that we wanted in terms of ideas and elements. We wanted the crowd to be tight, and it was driven by supporters. we want it at this size, and we want it to be modern, but then celebrate the game and build the cathedral soccer. So that kind of started my journey on terms of designing a stadium, and then that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. So what has this taught you about executing a goal? Like, how do you start, whenever I mean, I would imagine that you're like, I don't know, it might be, I don't know if you're a projects guy or anything like that, where you have personal projects at home, but I can imagine you being the type of person to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to build out my own car, and then
No,
working your way, making it happen. So,
so they've always there are all, well. First, we had a great team. I mean, when we were working in Thailand, we
Mhm.
had a really good team of legal and political consultants, and and enrolling people to be part of the project. Right, the city, the people, the folks in the local neighborhood, and make it having that level of engagement. But there are also always people that have done it before. So I was on the
Mm,
hunt to ask people. I don't mind ever saying I don't know something, and then I don't mind asking people like, how did you approach this? So we had partner organizations such as the Dodgers and the Sacramento Kings and the Warriors, and Atlanta at the time was building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and Atlanta United was launched, and you know and we talked to the Falcons, and we talked talking to everybody as much as possible to understand where the gaps are, what the best practices are, and try to enroll it, and incorporate it into the building as much as possible. Don't be afraid to ask. People are willing to help. And I think, all boats rise, right? So we learned a lot, when it came to the fan stack or the technology stack, or how do we do entry into the stadium. And at some level, too, we kind of reached beyond, you know, the sports world to understand what the business world is doing. What is the perception of memberships, and how is that
mm,
changing, and how do millennials change in their perception of mobile usage? For example, we went in hard pretty early. You know, but our thesis was uh, mobile is going to be everything. So um,
sure.
the head of technology, Christian Lau, and myself were looking at this, and we lived abroad. Everything is mobile based, but in the U.S., it took a long time. CDMA versus SIM card, and
Hmm.
voice voice versus texting, and texting came
Yeah,
later. All that was done around the world, right? But we wanted to make sure that we were trying to plan as much for the future. There's no such thing as future proof, but you want to
sure.
try to plan for the future and have flexibility, especially when you're building an infrastructure project, and then building that flexibility to adjust as much as you can. But all this is learning. You got to learn as much as you can, and it's okay that you don't know something. You just got to ask, and just incorporate, learn, and then find all the best practices. Then finding the way and the mechanism to put in a package for you to implement. Right. So
Yeah, absolutely. Benny, I am taking notes right now. This has been some invaluable information. There's a ton of people out there that are wanting to take some sort of a path that's a little less than maybe the traditional path. And I think you're a really good example of somebody that, you know, found this really, really interesting journey and made a massive impact from everything that I've gathered. So, in closing, what I usually like to touch on is, now that you've, gotten to where you are, what kind of impact do you want to make on the world?
well, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I don't know, and I think that's okay to say I don't know. But at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
um, I think there's levels, different. I do want to impact people, and whether that's in mass, that's something that I'm used to and rather do. And maybe in the future, I go back to that sector, or in a sense of what we're doing here, we're impacting large swaths of folks in our community. Um, and some people they want to impact certain lives, but I've always got that mindset of trying to figure out how to really impact in a positive way society. So also from there's a lot of problems we have in our world, whether it be in America or whether it be in a different country. And today we're witnessing some pretty bad stuff that we didn't think was going to happen in this century, but it's happening. And the world will keep changing. But as long as we are authentic and have integrity in what we do, I think we're all better for it as a community and a society. Those don't always work that way, but having that positive attitude and looking at change. And I love the fact that the world, at least in America, and I think the world is following. Look, you see a lot of companies that are cause-based companies that are using causes and be effective and authentic at addressing causes as part of their business model. And I love that. I love the fact that we are mobilizing society to do so, and I hope that trend continues and sticks. And I think we'll be all the better for it.
Absolutely. I love that as well. Benny, where can everybody find you and keep up with you? Is there anything that you want to shout out? Anything you want to plug? Anything at all?
Follow LAFC, and I try to post as much as I can at LAFC Stadium. Benny is my handle, but check us out as a team. Check us out on how we approached our business. I think it's very unique and interesting. I'm on LinkedIn, and you're still trying to. At this point in my career, I'm still trying to wonder what this kid wants to do when he grows up. So more to come.
I love that so much. Well, hey, Benny, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being on the Gem series. Everybody take notes. Benny's doing some amazing stuff. I hope you have a great day, and hope everybody, sends some good questions and goes to a heck of a lot of LAFC matches. So,
hey, welcome, and thank you for having me, Blake. Really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share.
Thanks, Benny.
All right, cheers.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Gem series, the podcast for anybody dedicated to investing in themselves. If you would like to see the resources mentioned in this episode, learn more about what we are up to at Rocket Level, or come over and join our team, just click on the links below. Until next time, this is Blake Chapman, and remember to be awesome and do awesome things.